Hi folks, this is David and you're watching Saving Time. Now on the desk in front of us today we have a Doxa from the early 70s, probably around 71, 72, somewhere in that region. And this one contained for me a little bit of a surprise. It's not what I was expecting at all, which is why I want to go over it with you good folks today. Now I'm going to throw this on a time grapher to start with. And a time grapher should give me some measurement to the accuracy that this watch is running at. But as you can see, this particular watch won't even give readings. So where you see S/D, that should be seconds per day, and it can't even read it. So there is something very, very, very wrong with this watch. So we're going to get into it now and take a look. It turns out, as I said, to be quite a surprise to me. I'm going to get the strap off first. Easy to do with a spring bar removal tool. These tools can be had pretty much anywhere on Amazon for a couple of bucks if you have a watch you'd like to change the strap for. This is a very easy way to do it. They do their quick release straps now, but they're not necessary. These tools are cheap, and as you can see, the job itself is quite easy. Getting into the movement of this watch after taking the back off, why is my hairspring stud embedded in the balance cock and our mobile stud carrier, or our stud carrier, is missing in action? So this watch has seen some very heavy modification. And as you'll see in a second, there is solder on the balance wheel. Because of the way this watch has been modified, the balance wheel will have need to have been rebalanced. We're also missing some movement screws for this watch, but I'll be honest, that's the least of its problems. Now the reason I bring this up, it's a little bit of a PSA. As you can see, these older style Doxas do go, or can go, for an awful lot of money. When you're buying, you want to make sure that what you're buying is actually a Swiss watch. The Doxa we have in front of us is more French than it is Swiss, and that's because the movement in it is a French Ebouche 23368, I believe. An Ebouche manufacturer basically manufactures movements for other watch companies, and there's nothing wrong with it. ETA do this, ETA. In fact, the Hamilton I'm wearing right now contains an ETA movement. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of very significant brands, including people like Jaeger-LeCoultre, have been Ebouche manufacturers. Ebouche just meaning basically draft in French, so the problem with this Doxa is the movement wasn't Swiss, it was French. And also the movement is, I'm not going to say bad, it does work, it ticks as a mechanical watch, it is just very cheap. As you go to work with it, you will see that it's built down to a cost. So I've just removed the dial and the hour wheel there, which just falls off the front. We're going to start to take a look at the movement. Now, if you look at the balance wheel, you can see that it's definitely not running right. So the modifications that have been done to this, they're kind of genius, to be honest. Obviously, the watchmaker that did it didn't have access to the spare parts. I have no idea why. Maybe it was an independent watchmaker who just did the repair, or somebody who did the repair perhaps on the watch themselves. The repair did work. I mean, the watch was ticking. It just kept time very badly. But nothing to say that's a direct result of the modification, although I believe in this case it is. Because if we look a bit closer at this, you can see the banking pin there on the left, on the right of the pallet fork is all chewed up. It's a little bit bent. It's got a chunk knocked out of it. And this is what I mean about this movement. If you look here at the way it's constructed, it's not great. Like I say, it's a serviceable movement. It does tick. It's just built to a cost, built to a price. So I'm just winding the power out of the watch, by the way, while I rab it onto you. Now you want to make sure all the power is out of the watch, so I'm just taking the ratchet wheel, moving the click aside, and letting that power wind out. If you want to work on a watch with the power still on it, that can lead to a very, very bad time. It can lead to a broken spring, parts flying off with the greatest of ease. So I'm going to take off the trainer wheels bridge here. And as I was saying, yeah, so nothing intrinsically wrong with this. It's just not a high quality item that you would expect to find in a Swiss watch, which if the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that this watch did not say Swiss made on the front. Even though it comes from Doxa, who are a fairly famous Swiss manufacturer, although they started in 1889 in France, a guy called Georges Ducommun started them. It was taken over actually by his son-in-law in 1936, so one Jacques Nardin, who was the grandson of Ulysse Nardin of the famous brand. So I'm getting this thing apart here. It's a very, very simple movement to take apart. So the ratchet wheel is coming off now. One of the reasons I decided to make this video, even this was a bit of a surprise to me, so I'm going to take the click and the click spring out. I'm going to use a piece of plastic sheeting, but as I say, one of the reasons I decided to make this was a bit of a PSA. These watches, regardless of movement, will go on sale for quite a high price, and this particular movement, the FE 23368, can be purchased on eBay for around $10. So I could have replaced the whole movement for a little amount of money, but I really wanted to see what other modifications have been done to this watch. So the crown wheel's coming off now, and this one will be reverse threaded, and that's got a little washer to help it go around. We're almost done with the disassembly of the front of the watch. Now this watch is really oily, so I'm just plunging my tweezers here into a bit of pegwood. This is very, very, very soft wood, a bit like balsa wood, that will clean oily residue off your tools. Great to keep around on your bench. So the pallet bridge is going out now. And you can see that this is just a very, very thin piece of stamped metal. Personally, I'm not too snobby. I don't insist like everything has to be Swiss. If you've seen me on the channel before, you'll have seen me take apart Russian watches and Czech watches. I like them all. I'm all about, you know, the beauty of the mechanical movement. And this one is okay. So the fourth wheel coming out, it's just cheap. Third wheel, leaving our center wheel in there, which is connected to the other side of the watch via the cannon pinion. So I'm going to take off the barrel bridge now, which the barrel lives underneath, the mainspring being in the barrel, which allows us to get power to the watch. So this watch, again, it's not too bad if you're just starting out to experiment on this kind of thing. It's also very easy to take apart. It has very few screws in it. So I'm just going to undo the set lever there a little bit so I can take out the winding stem and the crown. Like I said, this movement has very few moving parts, very few screws. All the screws tend to be the same. So if you're looking for something to take apart as your first watch, this one's not bad. This particular one's had a bit of a battered life, so it comes apart a little more difficultly than most. So I'm going to take the barrel out now. And that will just leave part of the keyless works there, our sliding pinion and winding pinion. Our winding pinion just fell out there, but that's fine. It will just be on the desk underneath. And you can see this watch is terribly oily and dirty, but that's not really a big surprise. It is over 50 years old, probably, or around 50 years old. So I'll flip the watch around. We're on the dial side now. You can see the cannon pinion there and the keyless and motion works, which I'm indicating with the tweezers. And this little rabbit fellow, which kind of acts as the holding plate with integrated spring for the entire keyless and motion works. And this is kind of the thing I mean when I say it's built down to perhaps a little bit more of a cost. All of the keyless and motion works is held in place by one ginormous plate with one screw in it. So it's kind of a very cheap way to do it. Now this spring here is massively under tension, so once again I'm going to use a sheet of plastic just so when I pull it out it doesn't ping off into the stratosphere. And that spring is now out. So out comes our minute wheel, out comes our yoke, and that was the yoke spring we just removed. Out comes our intermediate setting wheel. Now that shouldn't be there. That should be a capsule with screws. So this is another modification that's been done to this watch. The old watchmaker who did this, or maybe the enthusiast that did this, has just found the jewel and stuck it on there. I don't know with what, but it's super glue. Try a cannon pinion remover to get this cannon pinion off, and it's not having it. My cannon pinion's not particularly, cannon pinion remover is not a particularly expensive one, so it could be that. Now, I ended up using a pin vise, which I just clamped it in a pin vise and pulled it off manually. And I'm going to just remove our set lever here. There we go, and our set lever screw. Okay, so as you can see, the disassembly of this watch was not particularly tricky. There's not a lot in it. Now, I'm going to remove the mainspring for the barrel, which I'm going to do by just pushing down. Now, you'll have to forgive me. I didn't get a lot of this on camera, but basically what you want to do is just wind that mainspring out of the barrel as carefully as possible. It will spring out on you. Remember, it is a spring, so indeed it has quite a lot of power. So here are the parts of our watch ready to go into the cleaner, and I'm just going to use a bog standard ultrasonic cleaner. Now, after the parts come back, I am going to try these new antique watch winders I got. Now, I haven't had these for very long, so I'm not going to show a lot of this, but basically I wound the spring into the winder. I'll try and get a bit more of this on camera next time. These are tools that are very new to me, so, getting that on camera and figuring out a new tool is a bit much, but as you can see, I wound the spring there back into the barrel, and I put the barrel arbor back in, and I'm going to do a little bit of oiling on the spring. I also did a little bit of oiling on the bottom plate of the barrel. I'm not going to show all of the oiling, it's a little tedious to film. And there you go, the top's back on the barrel. We can start with the reassembly of this watch. So I'm going to start by putting the train of wheels together. So in goes the escapement wheel. The fourth wheel, you'll see this wheel has a very long pivot on it. The long pivot is because the second hand, the small second, is connected directly to the fourth wheel. So the third wheel goes in there, the center wheel will go on the top. Now, I've got the feeling that I should have put the barrel in, or the first wheel, before I put the center wheel in. I think I'm going to have to go back and correct that, I seem to remember. So here goes the center wheel in. Now, the cannon pinion will connect to this on the other side of the watch. This wheel turns once per hour, with the fourth wheel, the one that the second hand's connected to, turning once per minute, of course. And now we'll see that I cannot get that. I could probably force that in, but generally a bad idea. If you're taking up watchmaking and you're kind of having to smash things in place, that's probably not a good sign. So again, some of the oiling's been done off camera. It's kind of difficult with the setup I have to get all the oiling on camera. I'm going to try and hopefully change this. I'm still working my way through my first videos here on YouTube. So there's the train of wheels back together. Let's put on the train bridge here. Now this bridge was an absolute pain. For whatever reason, whether it's the design of the watch or it's just me, this is going to look like it took a minute. It did not. I literally spent 20 minutes trying to tease this thing into place. It's one of the most awkward bridges I've had to get on. Not sure why, but you can see there we are spinning freely now. Just know that it looks a lot easier in the edit than it actually was. Again, with this movement being built to a cost, it's almost like they didn't expect it to be repaired that much, so perhaps not as much attention was paid to repairability as would be on a Swiss movement for the same time period. Like Doxa, for most of its history, used ETA movements, ETA, and they're very good movements. Okay, let's get this movement back together. And whether I mentioned or not, Doxa was famous for the 1969 Sub 300T, which beat Rolex to the punch with the first commercial release of a helium release valve watch, Rolex being 1971 with the Sea Dweller. The company itself also has an interesting history, and I would recommend Doxa as a kind of vintage brand. Just make sure that you're actually getting a decent movement and that you're getting a Swiss watch. You want that Swiss made on the dial. Whether it makes any difference to you or not, it does make a difference to other collectors, which will of course affect the value of the watch. Now, I am not an investment collector. I don't give advice on which watches to buy to make money on, and I myself do not buy watches to make money on. However, if I'm going to spend $1,000 or $2,000 or a lot of money, I'm going to want to know that I can get some of that money at least back. Like, I don't want to be left in a situation where I've spent a lot of money and, I come to sell the piece because I'm tired of it. Maybe I want something else for the collection, and it turns out only to be worth $20. I mean, nobody likes that. So even though I'm not an investment watch guy, I still like to get a deal, Right, so I'm going to put the pallet fork and the pallet bridge back on. As you can see, there's not much to this watch. These small second watches tend to be the simplest movements, this being a lever escapement movement, a bog standard, most often called the Swiss lever escapement. To be honest, though, was invented in England in 1754 by a bloke called Thomas Mudge, but the Swiss kind of perfected it and popularised it and put it in the vast majority of watches you'll see. So our crown wheel goes back on, and that one is reverse threaded, so just watch that. I'm going to put our click back in here, kind of an unusually shaped click. And our click spring will need to go in. So I'm going to use our plastic trick here. So basically all this is I put a thin piece of plastic bag over the top of the whole movement, so when I push that spring in place, if it does go ping, hopefully it hits the plastic bag and we don't lose it. Now it's worth noting that the plastic bag's not infallible. I still have lost springs even with the plastic over the top, so you still do need to be a bit careful. So this watch is definitely looking a lot better now we've cleaned it up. I am probably going to have to replace the balance complete. I could probably, yeah, I'm probably going to have to replace most of it just because I don't think it was original to this movement. Whoever did the work, I think that they used a completely different balance. I'm not quite sure what they did. I'm not quite sure if it's madness or genius, but I put a little bit of a wind into the watch there, and you can see our pallet fork does spring backwards and forwards. So back to the dial side of the watch. I'm going to use a little oil here before I put the yoke in. And again, I'm not doing all the oiling on camera, mostly because I lack the magnification for it. So this watch, or this movement, should I say, has, put the set lever in, has one of the most kind of vicious springs I've seen on the bend angle. Like, it really does give a lot of tension. So you have to be quite careful with that. So I'm just going to get all the parts of the keyless works here, being called the keyless works, of course, because it lets you wind and set the time of the watch without a key. So a key used to be necessary on most pocket watches and clocks. So the keyless works solves the problem of you losing the key, because the winding stem and the crown, which you use to wind and set the watch, stay in the watch. Now you're going to watch me put this sliding pinion in backwards. I do spot that in a second. So if you are currently shouting at the monitor, I know I see it too. So that wouldn't work. If you left that in backwards, you wouldn't be able to set the time or wind the watch, most probably. So the winding pinion going in, and you'll see here's where I realize, and there you go. The sliding pinion is now in correctly. Now I'm going to put this spring in, and again, this is the one, oh, there we go, it's almost gone already. This one's going to look easy. It wasn't. Again, if you are thinking of having to go with this movement because it is cheaper, try the plastic bag trick. This has to be bent under quite some tension, more than usual. But there you go, you see I've got it on. I didn't film a lot of that again because it took 20 minutes. Maybe if I was a little more experienced, it would have been quicker. But our intermediate setting gear is going in there. It's just basically interfacing us between the keyless and motion works. And I'm once again going to leave a mistake in here because I think it's important to show that, you know, this is quite difficult. Not as easy as a lot of people make it look. So what I've done here is I've made a mistake. I'm going to put the cover plate in for the motion works without putting the minute wheel in, which means in a minute I'll have to undo it. The reason I was so eager to put this cover plate on is that spring is now bent under tension, and the longer it's not covered up, the more chance of it pinging away. So I made the mistake purely for that reason. I didn't want that spring to launch. Now I'm using a pin vise once again to put the cannon pinion back on. And the reason the minute wheel wasn't in there is because you need to put the cannon pinion on first, because you can shear some of the teeth off the minute wheel if you do it the other way around, because you have to use pressure to fit the cannon pinion. It's not a big error. Sometimes you just need to go back and redo a step because you've missed something. And as you can see, it didn't take that long. But it's worth pointing out that these little things happen, so if you're trying this yourself, try not to get frustrated with it. It's very easy to get frustrated with these tiny components, but really it happens to all of us. So I'm just checking that the winding and setting works here, and everything seems to push backwards and forwards very nicely. It's all been oiled, it's smooth as butter, and we have a watch we can now wind and set the time on. So this thing is almost back together at this point. What we are missing is the motion part of the watch. We are missing a little bit of oiling for the jewels on the trainer wheels here. And I'm going to try and get a better macro camera to show this. The problem is when I'm doing this here, I can't really see it either because I'm looking at the same view you are, and I'm normally a lot closer up, so I'm going to have to sort something out for the filming. But we're missing the balance complete here. We are missing the part that does the tick and the tock. So I want to take a look at this spring. As you can see, the hairspring looks in pretty rough shape. I'm going to take it off the balance wheel here so we can get a better look at it. But it's not great. So I'm going to clean it up and I'm going to do a few little bends. And you can see I've bent it in a lot more in shape. I'm going to push it backwards and forwards to see if it's magnetized. It's not. This spring is not very good. I could spend hours bending this back into shape with possible results, but an easier way to do this would just be to use a new spring. So you can work with a hairspring, but it's very delicate work, and that hairspring has been altered from its original anyway, so it would never work in a watch like this that had a proper balance cock with a proper stud carrier in it. So really, I'm going to buy another one. And here I'll show you the eBay listing. I bought an entire movement. Not only that, I bought the upgraded movement for this watch for £14.90. That's probably around 20 of your American free meals. So quite cheap to replace parts for this watch. Now, I do want to leave the Doxa with the original movement. I do not want to create a Franken watch, which means I will have to take the setting arm and the stud carrier off this watch or off this balance cock and put them on my balance cock. That means we're not going to get an ink block or a shock setting on our watch, but ours never shipped with one. So I'm not a great believer in mixing and matching watch parts. Like, I don't want to create a Franken watch. Like, even though that this movement is very cheap, I still want to pay it some respect. I don't just want to go replacing parts of it that never would have been in there. And both this setting lever, and balance mobile stud carrier would have been on the original watch. So that's why I don't mind swapping them. But that means I have to take the balance complete from this watch and swap it into our new watch. I'm also swapping the balance complete in because our balance complete in the old watch was not the correct one. It's been changed at some point. So basically, I'm just going to swap the balance complete and all the other stuff onto our balance cock. So to be honest, this is quite a lot of work to go through for a watch like this. Now, I'm a big fan of Doxa. Like, I really like the fact that they used to make clocks for Bugatti, for instance, and they've been in instrument panels in lots of airlines and shipping and whatnot. I like the brand. This watch in itself, not a huge fan, but I'll pay it some respect here by getting it back into a running shape. Now, because I've put a new stud carrier on this, a new balance complete, a new setter, this will need quite a bit of regulation, which I'm not going to do in this video. I may do a separate video about how to regulate a watch like this, but for right now, we're just going to get it back together in ticking so I can put it on and maybe wear it from time to time. I'm not going to be too concerned about it. So I'm just rebuilding all this. This is extremely fiddly and extremely tiny work, so apologies if I didn't capture it on camera so well. But basically, we're just swapping the balance complete from one balance cock to another. We're also swapping, as I said, the stud carrier and the set-in lever there so we can regulate the watch properly. Our balance cock is still going to have a hole drilled in it where it shouldn't have, but I think that's kind of nice. It does a little bit of history for this watch. Certainly the next person that gets it and opens it up is going to wonder why there's a big hole there, which I find quite nice. Something this old should have a few knocks to it. So now it should just be a case of fitting that into our watch, and there it is. That actually was a nightmare to fit in there, which is why there's no filming of it. Normally one of these drops in no problem at all, but you can see us, we're in here and ticking away, which is nice. So the movement came apart, the movement went back together. Would I recommend this particular Doxa? No, I would not. Get one with a ETA movement and ETA that has been heavily modified by Doxa. Now the hour wheel is going back in. The more observant of you will notice this is the hour wheel from the newer movement, and the reason you can tell that is just because it has a setting for a date on it. Long story on that one, but this hour wheel works fine. So if you've made it to this part, a subscription would be great. I'm trying to grow the channel at the moment, reach more people. So like, subscribe, do all that YouTube stuff. And we'll see this watch on wrist. Just basically putting the dial on, the hands on. The hands need a bit of a clean. I'm not going to worry too much about it at this stage. This was an interesting watch to take apart. It was interesting to put back together. It was interesting to see some either mad or genius watchmaker, the modifications they'd done through lack of parts. But it's not a watch I'm terribly concerned with. I'll probably go to the trouble of actually getting new hands for it at some point, because the plating on these ones is damaged, and I'll probably add a new crystal and do the regulation for it. I might do another video on that if people are interested, but I think we've spent enough time with this one. So here it is on wrist. It's actually a lovely looking watch, and it's been interesting. So thank you for watching this one. It's been a pleasure. I'll see you next time.